So, for those of you who don't know, um, when I originally started this channel, like back way back in the days before I really even started um talking about sort of politics or sort of you know general sort of political ideas, I used to very much go after debunking conspiracy theorists, and more after that, I went to talking about um these alternative therapy people who claim wild accusations that, well, things like ginger can somehow magically cure you from pretty much every ailment going. And yet, these types of remedies and tinctures that they like to pursue have never really been scientifically proven. Now, for anyone who is up to date with, of course, the discourse around homeopathy, will know that back in the early 2000s, the NHS used to actually offer homeopathy. How did this come to be? And then, more specifically, how then did this end up being, well, taken away from, the NHS? Why then did we suddenly stop using it? Well, we've got no one to blame than, of course, our current monarch, King Charles, for that. He led a big movement to get uh, homeopathy onto the NHS, to use homeopathic treatments. And of course, after about 2 years, the British Medical Journal looked at all the studies, looked at all the available evidence, and said, hey, this is just a giant waste of money. Why are we doing this? And of course, very quickly, it was then dropped from the NHS. But of course, homeopaths have still said that no, our ideas really work. Honestly, guys, they really do. And this is something that we've got to generally sort of push back against, but it doesn't help when you've got King Charles, who just a couple of weeks ago appointed to his team of royal physicians a homeopath. And if you go back in time, and in fact, there's a good opinion article about this that also talks about this, and it says, I'm just going to read out this part because it can perfectly sums it up. So in 1853, Queen Victoria's doctor was calling this practice, of course, homeopathy, an outrage to human reason. And in the following 170 years, it has been debunked repeatedly and comprehensively. After all, its principles run in complete opposition to science and are based on what is, quote, curing like with like. An exact, shall we say, of a raw onion to treat watery eyes by strengthening the process of dilution, shake it up and produce quantum entanglement. And honestly, these are exactly the type of things we really do not need at this moment in time. And yet the guy who is appointed, a guy called Dr. Michael Dixon, has championed things like thought field therapy, Christian healing, an Indian herbal cure that has been ultra diluted with alcohol, which claims to kill breast cancer cells. And he wrote an entire article to the BMJ, or the Royal Society of Medicine, to say that, our theories just might be unfashionable at this moment in time. But look, you shouldn't really ignore us. To which I then say, well, let's look back to the British Medical Journal when they did this. And one response in particular that got a lot of attention, called response to homeopaths have some explaining to do. because oh boy, um, the BMJ published or at least allowed this homeopath to publish this article, and oh boy, did it garner a lot of responses, especially from actual doctors, scientists who called out their nonsense and quackery to say that hey, that's kind of wrong. So we're going to be reading, I think, this response to a response to a response rather than the original response, because I think this really sort of summed it up, because it honestly killed the debate, because the next one was a response from the Society of Homeopaths to update the response that they had actually changed their email address. And I am not kidding that any more responses to this, because it had become so embarrassing that that they had to update their email address so it was more user friendly, so that people could email them directly rather than the hundreds of thousands of responses they got from doctors calling out this nonsense that had been published back in the British Medical Journal. And this goes all the way back to the 19th of February 2004. And this was a veterinary surgeon responding to this and calling out this nonsense that had been published. So let's get on into this, because I think it's well worth reminding people. Because unfortunately, now that Charles has appointed a homeopath as his chief physician, I worry this is going to come back with a vengeance. And especially Charles himself, who was a big advocate of homeopathy. But again, it's worth reminding, these remedies that they promote do not work, have never been proven to work, and there is a good reason for this. So let's go through this response then, shall we? But before we do that, please remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page, the one foundation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. There's the YouTube thank you button, and of course, the Pony Club as well. So let's crack on into this then, shall we? So I am a veterinary surgeon and general practice, and have been following this debate and others with a similar nature in the veterinary press with great interest. And the remarks of Anne Sash couldn't have been more timely. For me, and in some ways, they do mirror my own thoughts on the subject of surely the one way to test whether or not there is anything to homeopathy is simple: to try it and see. The crux of the argument is from a skeptical point of view, since chemically homeopathic remedies are either similar to water or sugar, they are in fact identical to those substances and therefore can exert no genuine effect. Homeopaths will argue, on the other hand, that the remedies are indeed different based on their components and actually process properties beyond pharmacology, chemistry, or physics, acting in other as yet unknown ways. So think about this for a second, that he does make a very valid point, that homeopaths will argue that their remedies act beyond all known pharmaceutical, chemistry, or even physics knowledge, acting in unknown, mysterious ways. Just again, it just goes to show you how insane it is that these people have massive practices. And honestly, it's quite depressing when you see people in this area that have huge, massive practices and operate on this as if they are, curing people, when they've just given someone sugar water. It's really, really depressing, because unfortunately, regular people fall for this nonsense and they delay the actual treatments they need to, get better. and can spend exorbitant amounts of money on this, which is even more worrying. But even back in 2004, people were calling out this nonsense. In fact, it's 10 years almost since this debate last happened. And ironically, now it's 10 years, and I worry this debate is going to come round yet again. So I'm trying to sort of, head it off the past this time almost. So it continues. In an attempt to try and resolve some of these matters, I have devised a simple, homegrown clinical trial I would like to appeal to for volunteers. The aim of this trial is to discover whether it is possible to distinguish between a homeopathic remedy and a placebo preparation. One of the problems with previous clinical trials carried out on homeopathic remedies is that not all remedies are suited to all patients when it comes to the treatment of the disease. Remedies have to be, quote, individualized for each patient, and this causes problems with trials which often prefer a one size fits all remedy to test. When homeopathic remedies are being developed, however, they undergo a process called proving, where healthy volunteers take a homeopathic remedy and will, as a result, experience, quote, a set of symptoms which are then recorded. Once they are then known, the remedy to which in question can then be used to treat the same symptom in unwell patients who then exhibit them. So, this is the big nonsense that homeopaths come out whenever we see these sort of trials, because we know this. If someone has a problem or an illness, we could go, oh, well, they need, this medicine because we know the effects of this medicine is used to treat this illness. Homeopathy, of course, does not do this. Treatments have to be individualized because each individual human body, is somehow different and magical in some sort of cosmic remedy way. And you start to see why, of course, we should be treating homeopaths as absolute lunatics, not as serious, genuine medical professionals. Because if we could figure this out in like the 1800s, how on earth, and yet this over 100 years later, why are these people still being taken seriously when it was called by Queen Victoria's doctor an affront to science? So nowhere, of course, in Hermann's on anthology or any other major homeopathic reference is it suggested that the providers themselves need to be individualized for a particular remedy in the same way that patients do. When undergoing homeopathic treatments, since plainly it would be impossible to individualize a remedy prior to its characteristics being known. Thus, a test by homeopathic proving is a good test for homeopathy, and none of the pitfalls of the clinical trial setting where observations can be subjective and patients unpredictable, when the poor results are often attributed to problems with individualization. So here you go. That's, of course, the big problem that homeopaths will say. Whenever sort of, and especially back in the day when you saw these trials come out, and the trials, or at least the attempts to use homeopathic medicine to treat people, were just absolutely abysmally poor results. You know, it was proving no better to be a placebo. And then, of course, homeopaths came out en masse to say, oh no, these clinical trial tests are wrong. You don't understand. It's all about individualization. That's, how we work to individualize each medicine to, each patient. It's not about a one size fits all. But this guy is going, okay, let's look at this. That if you know a patient and they are suffering from this, and this, happens to quote cure them, then we can give this to another patient who is suffering from that to see if your, homeopathic remedy works. It's actually the kind of test that homeopaths should be trying to run and do themselves. But none of these, of course, have been really interested in doing this. So Um, hang on. So yeah, it goes on to talk about how this would be the perfect trial, and maybe we can sort of do sort of some of these. Um, so no, but yeah, I also like the fact that competing interest, no competing interest, and yet this is the update to the Science of Homeopath, changing their email address. No competing interest. You're the Society of Homeopathic Medicine. I think that'd be a competing interest, but there you go. Yeah. Look, unfortunately, I do worry now that um this guy's been appointed, one of Charles's, chief physicians. Um, I do think you could see this debate reemerge again almost 10 years later. We wasted millions of pounds providing homeopathic remedies and treatments to people which didn't work. And yet now I worry that Charles appointing this absolute quack to be like one of his like chief medical providers is going to lend once again homeopathy some undue credibility, which it has not earned in a scientific way. It has not earned really in a legitimate way. It's once again, as always, been debunked time and time again. And yet, here you have, as we said, going all the way back to 10 years at this point, where, and it's not that, if you go back to that BMJ Journal article, you can just see all the responses from scientists just responding and calling out all the nonsense, and yet we're still trying to have this conversation about this still after all these years, after again this original article it's response to just called Homeopathy, 1999. But I do worry this is going to come back, unfortunately, in a big way. And it's something we need to sort of be aware of, be worried about, because, of course, last time we wasted quite a bit of money on this nonsense. Hopefully, we can solve it this time. But as always, thank you very much for watching, and of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.